It's Michael Popok, Legal AF, here to answer the question on everybody's mind. Does the conviction of Donald Trump in New York, making him a felon, violate the conditions of his release in the other criminal cases around the country, state and federal? Remember, when he got arraigned 4 times in New York for the election interference case for which he's now a 34-count felon. In Georgia, for the election interference case, sprawling version of it, RICO, racketeering case, conspiracy brought by the Fulton County DA. D.C. election interference case in front of Judge Chutkan, which we're waiting on the immunity decision by the Supreme Court. And 4, Mar-a-Lago espionage based on Donald Trump's refusal, as alleged in the indictment, to return sensitive and national defense information, top secret classified information belonging to the American people, jeopardizing national security on his way out of the White House and then refusing to return it upon proper demand. Those are 4 cases. Despite what you've heard, he's been arraigned or was arraigned in all 4 places. You've seen some of the photographs of him being, sometimes he was photographed, fingerprinted every time, and put into the system in each of those things. He has a criminal defendant number. He's soon to have a convicted felon number in New York with the probation department, because that's who he now has to report to, including for an interview. I do another hot take on that one. You can look for that one. So Donald Trump's just not former 45. He has a serial number in each of these places. His release is at the mercy and the discretion of the criminal trial judge, as he's been reminded, as Judge Chutkan reminded him, and others have reminded him, and Judge Merchan has reminded him. He is a criminal defendant in a criminal justice system for which the judge is the gatekeeper. And he is going to be treated, and has been treated in these other courts, except save for Mar-a-Lago down in Florida, like any other criminal defendant, now a convicted felon. Each of his releases, Georgia, Mar-a-Lago, D.C. election interference, and of course now New York, was conditioned upon, certain conditions of release, right? That's not probation conditions, but we just call them conditions of release in lieu of bond. Often, don't have to post money to ensure your return to the court. It doesn't have to be revoked, but these conditions can be revoked, and that's where the gag orders come in. The gag orders in the various states. There's one in Georgia. There's a limited one in Georgia. There's one in D.C. election interference. It's been upheld through the D.C. Courts of Appeals and ultimately the United States Supreme Court. And there was a number of them, at least 2, in New York. And there was one in the New York Attorney General case by Judge Engoron. Judge Cannon never got around in Mar-a-Lago to issue a gag order. You see what's happening there. So that's just an example of a condition of release. There are other conditions of release. And generally in all of them is that the person out on personal recognizance, not bond, like Donald Trump, and now a convicted felon, not commit any other crimes. It's usually, however, phrased as any other new crimes. I do not believe it includes the fact that at the time he was put on probation, the time the conditions of his release were set by the judge in Georgia, Judge McAfee, Judge Chutkan, Judge Cannon, Judge Merchan, and the like. They already knew about these other indictments. The first one was New York, but the others knew by that point. And so he can't commit any new crimes, including contempt, criminal contempt. I'll talk about that next. But the actual indictment was already pending in New York when these other judges handled his release. And so I do not believe, and it would not be, a violation of Donald Trump's condition of release now that he's been convicted in one of the 4 cases, right? His strategy of delay, he finally ran out. The musical chair stopped, boom. The case in New York, what we sometimes jokingly refer to as the zombie case because it just wouldn't die. It lasted 2 Manhattan district attorneys, Cy Vance on one hand, all the way up to Alvin Bragg. No matter how many times somebody tried to kill this Walking Dead, it survived, right? Special prosecutors who left noisily and wrote articles in the New York Times attacking their bosses still survived. Cy Vance handing it off, boom, to Alvin Bragg, new prosecutor, still survived. A full new vetting process by Alvin Bragg. Survived. Zombie case. But that zombie case has been floating around for a long time. And so it would not be. Now, if Donald Trump, however, just to show you the contrast here, if Donald Trump were to commit a new set of crimes, he would violate his terms of release in Georgia with Judge McAfee, Judge Chutkan, D.C., and the like. And how would that come up now? Well, Donald Trump is continuing to act out right up until the convictions by the jury in New York and right after the convictions, attacking the jurors, thank God he didn't know their names and they were anonymous, because he would have done that too. Attacking the judge, Judge Merchan, Judge Merchan's daughter, who was a political lobbyist, the family, the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, individuals that prosecuted him, Matt Colangelo, Josh Steinglass, you name it, Susan Hoffinger, they're all coming out of his mouth. And he is still subject to gag order provisions, because he is not only is he still a unwilling participant in the criminal justice system in New York, supervised by Judge Merchan ultimately, and ultimately by the probation department in New York with a serial number, with a felon number, but he's now a felon. And so he's not going to be able to vote if he votes in New York. I have to look at the current law in New York about felons voting and whether their rights have been restored yet. Carrying a gun, even though he's got Secret Service around him, so it shouldn't be a problem, might be out of his reach at this point, and the like. And so he is still subject as a felon who's not yet been sentenced in this interstitial gap where he's been released on his own recognizance. He has conditions of his release, and they haven't been removed. The gag order still is in effect. And so if he violates the gag order while we're awaiting sentencing, that will go into the mix for Judge Merchan in what level of sentence he gives him. And so the judge is watching carefully. The probation department is making the pre-sentencing report, is watching carefully. The criminal contempt hearing is not over. And there could be new hearings brought by the prosecutors, the Manhattan DA, against Donald Trump. And if he's convicted of these new criminal contempt based on his conduct and his acting out and his lack of self-restraint, and again, he's in this dilemma, right? He's trying to raise money, so he wants to act out, and he wants to try to use it to get elected. But at the same time, he's violating the conditions of his release, which could end up being criminal contempt, meaning criminal, a conviction, which would violate the terms of his release in the other places, putting them, the judges there, on the horns of a dilemma that he's been convicted of criminal contempt. He has an obligation not to commit any new crimes, but now there's been new crimes committed. And now it's going to be up to the prosecutors and the judges in those individual places, Georgia State, D.C. Federal, we know Canada's not going to do anything, Mar-a-Lago Federal, and of course Judge Merchan, to decide what to do about that. Does he have to post a bond? Is fining enough? Does he have to be temporarily incarcerated? Does he have to be put away for a day or two or a week or a month, depending upon the level of the contempt? If you don't do anything, you're just going to reward literally bad behavior. And it's a terrible, terrible slight and degrading of the criminal justice system to let him get away with it. It'll give license and permission to other defendants not named Donald Trump to do the exact same thing. Just like we're seeing acting out after COVID on airlines, and this is a new thing that flight attendants and the crew have to deal with, we're going to see more and more acting out unless there's consequences for Donald Trump violating his conditions of release, and in particular his gag order. So to answer the question I posed at the top, does the conviction create a violation of the conditions of release in the other jurisdictions, 3 jurisdictions where he's being criminal prosecuted? The answer to that is no, because it's not a new crime. However, could Donald Trump still commit new crimes within these proceedings, including for criminal contempt, and then have to have the judges have a hard conversation with him and his lawyers about what to do next, and whether conditions of his release have to be changed, whether he's violated them, whether there's jail associated with it, and or fines? That is yet to be seen. And we've got 6 weeks between now and sentencing to see what he does next. And believe me, Judge Merchan and his staff and others around him and the probation department, to which Donald Trump now has to report in New York, are watching. And we're watching right here on Legal AF and on the MeidasTouch Network. Watch me on our YouTube and our podcast. We call it Legal AF, the podcast, for a reason. Join us on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and you'll find out why. We do it at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, and then on all major podcast platforms. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.